Lester Potts was a utilitarian child of the Great Depression. He was born November the 4th, 1928, in a little community called Pine Grove of Pickens County, Alabama. And he was the firstborn son to Lester and Katie B. and Lester E. And Lester Sr. was a sawmiller. And sawmilling, you see, was in the blood of these folks. They had traveled from South Carolina in the 1830s to Oktibbeha County, Mississippi. And there they set up shop and started sawmilling. I assume they were sawmillers from way back. We actually have an old picture of Dad's great-great-grandfather running the sawmill, and it was a big crew with big logs and saws. And so sawmilling was in the blood of my grandfather and my father. My grandfather's dad died, and he and his brother moved with his mom to Pickens County, Alabama in the 1890s. They grew up there. Big Daddy, I called him, tried farming. And in the Great Depression, he had a hard time being successful enough to put shoes on the feet and food on the table for the family. So he gave up sawmilling for a while and tried to farm. But he went back to his roots and got the old sawmill brought back to Pickens County and started sawmilling again about 1930. And I actually have a picture in the family collection of my dad at age 2 sitting on Big Daddy's knee the day the sawmill arrived again. Lester, my dad, grew up in this place which was a place of hard work. It was a place of love, a place of family, a place where roots were laid down, firm roots. And he learned the meaning of work ethic there. Lester grew up basically working in the sawmill. And from what he told me, it was a very, very hard way of life. But bonds were formed between my dad and the men who helped out on the sawmill. One particular fellow was Albert Corder. Albert was an African-American man that was older than Dad, but he became a surrogate father figure for Dad and a brother figure. And Albert and his buddies helped to raise Lester Potts in that crucible of toil we called a sawmill. And my dad learned what it means to pull your weight and pull a part of your brother's weight. Because if you didn't do that, somebody might get hurt. And he told me about instances where there were very nearly someone hurt in the sawmill. Dad, he told me, that is, he used to skid logs out of the woods like a mule himself. His dad would strap him up with a harness and he would skid pulpwood out. So old Lester was a pretty strong guy. He was strong from early on and he continued to be that way. I think the earliest rings in Lester's core were laid in that sawmill, in that place, with wood dust and love and sweat and sinews and hard work. And I think they, to some degree, made Dad what he was. The Great Depression was hard on him and was hard on the family. They eked out a living. But it was the woods and the sawmill and the hard work and the grace that they got in abundance that pulled them through. Lester Potts was a strong man. One of the ways to characterize him is that he was strong. He was not only strong physically, but he was strong in his faith, and he was strong in his sense of ethic and service, his sense of family. Lester continued to be a sawmiller for much of his life, and then met his future bride, my mom, at a church function. And they married, and she was a little different than he. She was an English teacher. She was a librarian. She was a very cultured Southern belle from Mississippi. And the old sawmiller sort of met his match with her. They wound up being married almost 50 years, and I was their only child. So they were married for 7 years before I was born. Lester moved to Aliceville, Alabama with his bride in 1963 and had many jobs there, but he never really left the woods very far behind. Dad was a community servant. Lester was about the business of helping people all the time. And you know, the thing is, He did not care what color your skin was. He didn't care what side of the tracks you lived on, whether you went to church or not, what your occupation was. He loved you. And He expressed that love through helping you and through listening to you and through being a brother to you. You see, Les went about town doing for folks. He made birdhouses for little old ladies. He was a Little League baseball coach. He was a Sunday school teacher. He was a scout leader. He built sets for the Aliceville Little Theater. He repaired people's refrigerators when they were broken. When there was a church work day, Les was there doing the work. He was an example of what it means to be a civic servant. And Lester was the oak under which I grew to be a man. The shade, you see, he provided me was my inspiration. He and my mom both. Because Lester really grew into the kind of tree that he used to be his sustenance. His favorite tree was a white oak, an Alabama white oak, and he used to point that out to me when we'd walk in the woods. We loved to walk in the woods. And Dad could identify all the leaves and acorns and bark, and he taught his son all of that. And I remember probably a third of what he tried to teach me. But the white oak was his favorite tree. He said, "Son, that's a strong tree. It's a white oak. It's straight, it's strong, it's useful to the community. You can make furniture out of it. And there are not many of them around anymore because they're valuable." So I learned a lot about life from walking with this man in the woods. Well, I went to medical school and learned to be a neurologist and moved back close to where Mom and Dad were, which was still Pickens County, Alabama, Aliceville. I moved to Tuscaloosa and set up practice. Dad retired from actually the city council. The last thing he did was he was a civic servant there by serving on the city council in Aliceville. And then he retired, and he and Mom moved to Tuscaloosa to be close to me and my girls and my wife. It turns out that was pretty hard for the old guy. He had put down roots there in Pickens County soil and had grown up there, so it was hard to uproot and come to Tuscaloosa, but he was glad he did, I think. Shortly before the move, looking back with hindsight, we can see that there were early signs that Alzheimer's disease was breaching those white oak timbers with its blight, which bores to the core. There was an old magnolia tree that was in the churchyard. He loved that tree, and actually there was a new pastor whose wife stumbled over a limb. The tree was losing limbs and was diseased. So the trustees of the church voted to cut the tree down. This made Lester angry. Now you have to understand, Lester rarely got angry about anything. I could make him mad by the things that I was doing that were little boy things to do, but he was a very even keel man. But he got mad about that, and he went and basically told all the trustees what he thought of him for cutting his tree down. That was uncharacteristic of Dad, and looking back, we know that was an early sign. Being a Great Depression kind of guy who was about work, when he moved to Tuscaloosa, he got a job in his retirement parking cars at a local physician's office building. Thought that's great for Dad to do that, and he'll enjoy it. Unbeknownst to me, he began to have trouble. He began to lock keys in cars, forget where he parked cars, get lost in the parking deck and stay gone for 45 minutes. And his co-workers actually got upset with him for that. They didn't understand why that was going on. And I got a call one day from the hospital attorney who was his boss. And she said, "I need to come talk to you. Are you aware of what's going on with your dad?" I said, "No. What do you mean?" She said, "I'll come over." So she came to my office and she sat down and she said, "I want you to know that I'm breaking employment laws right now to tell you about this, but this is important." She said, "Because my dad, you see, had Alzheimer's disease. And I think your dad may too." I said, "What are you talking about?" She told me about these instances. I began to put two and two together. He had had a couple of fender benders on the way home Mom had told me about, maybe a couple of missed checks that he couldn't account for. And what the truth of the matter was hit me like a ton of bricks. Here I was, a neurologist, supposed to be trained in diagnosing and treating conditions like that, and I didn't recognize it in my own father Or maybe I did and I just was denying it. For whatever reason, I thanked her from the bottom of my heart that day, and I told her what you've done today is going to be very, very important and is going to set us on the road to treatment. Dad called me later that day and said, "Son, I've decided I'm not going to work there anymore, and I'm going to spend some time with your mom in our retirement." I said, "Dad, I think that's a great thing to do." Later I found out that after I hung up, he cried, and I certainly cried after he hung up. Because you see, this was the first time that my dad had failed in his occupational duties and his work. His ethic was beyond reproach. And he was failing at his tasks, and he knew it. That started in motion a series of events that has changed our lives forever. So we got a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. That's what it was. One of my partners treated him, got him appropriately treated on medication. And we began to walk that road that can be horrendous at times. My mother kept Dad at home almost the whole time through the moderate stages of the disease. Like a hero is what she was. And I kept saying, "Mom, please consider getting some help. You're going to break down with this." She said, "No, I have to do it. I have to do this. This is my love. I have to do this." So things got pretty rough. Dad descended rapidly into Alzheimer's disease. He lost his language function early. He lost his ability to use his hands. The very, very crafty, capable man that I knew was not able to do that anymore. I can remember the garden gate needed to be replaced. And I said, "Dad, let's go out and do this." Used to be it was my job to hold his planks. Used to be it was my job to hold the gate up while he did the work. Not anymore, because he couldn't figure out how to use the screwdriver. So I had to do the work, and old Papa had to be the helper. That was a turning point. He couldn't put the lights on the Christmas tree. He couldn't figure out how to untangle the lights. He had trouble getting eye-hand coordination together. Couldn't drive anymore. He realized that he was having these problems. I know he did, because he quit smiling and he quit interacting with us like he used to and quit laughing. He would kneel down with Mom to say prayers at night, she would tell me. And she would be in the middle of prayers and he would be crying. And she would say, "Lester, honey, we're praying. Why are you crying?" And he would say to her, "Because I'm so messed up and I don't know why." So this is the road we walked for a while. And then fortunately something happened. We have a dementia daycare center in Tuscaloosa, Caring Days, which is a faith-based, all-encompassing dementia daycare center where loved ones can take their loved one that has dementia and leave them for the day, for a half day perhaps, and know that they're in a safe, loving environment, and then take them home at night. Now this place has art therapy, music therapy, dance therapy, reminiscence, pet therapy, all sorts of activities for folks to keep them stimulated and keep them safe and engaged. Dad went to Caring Days a broken man who didn't smile anymore. And after a few days at Caring Days, he came back different. In many ways, the old Lester was shining through again. And it's because of the person-centered, validating care he got from these folks that knew how to do it. Vicki Kerr, the director of Caring Days, became his surrogate daughter and Dad her surrogate father. And they had a loving relationship for 4 or 5 years down there. Vicki got her start with early childhood education in young folks that had disabilities. And this served her well as she helped to treat dementia patients in her facility. I told Vicki, I said, "Vicki, I wish you had known Lester the way he used to be, the old Lester." She laughed and said, "Oh, I don't. I want to know the Lester that I know now, because that's the one I love." She loved him in the moment, you see. And that's what I learned is so important. Lester turned around, and what was so amazing about this is that this broken man, who we were wondering if he was even going to be able to function down there, turned out ministering to everybody there. What happened was that Lester's infectious engagement and his laughter and his love turned everybody around. And so it was a party when Lester came in every day. In fact, he would come in and he would want to hug everybody. See, Dad was a hugger, and he was a strong hugger. So if Lester hugged you, you might have a cracked rib or two after that. He would hug people 16 or 17 times a day. So Vicki Kerr and the staff had to figure out a way to deal with that. They wanted Lester to be able to show his love, but not to hurt anybody. So what Vicki did is she started blowing kisses to Lester. And when Lester would come in the front door with those big arms extended, ready to hug her, Vicki would say, Les, kiss, blow a kiss. He would catch it, send one back, and she wouldn't get that bone-crushing hug. So Lester, she figured out a way to channel Lester's love into a more safe expression. Then the miracle happened. You see, Les met a retired artist named George Parker. George Parker had painted for many, many years, and he had painted coastal scenes that are all over Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, Gulf Coast. Lighthouses, birds, beautiful ocean scenes, etc. But George had had a rough time and had actually had a near-death experience. He had a cardiac arrest and found himself in the intensive care unit on the ventilator. He woke up realizing that he had had an encounter with the divine and would be changed forever. George Parker talked to God in that experience and said, "You've obviously saved me for something. What is it?" And he was convicted that it was to share his art for the rest of his life with underprivileged dementia patients. So as soon as George Parker got able to walk and rehabbed up, he volunteered at a local community college. And that college had an outreach program that George volunteered for as an artist. And his first place to go was to Caring Days. So George Parker went to Caring Days, and there he met these Alzheimer's patients, one of whom was the old sawmiller from Pickens County that, as far as I know, had never drawn, painted a picture of any kind, and was not really even an appreciator of art. We'd go to a museum, Mom and Dad and me, and Lester was the fastest one through the museum. Mom and I had the headphones on, listening to everything about the pictures, and Papa was already in the gift shop, worrying about how much those gifts were. So he was not somebody that really appreciated art. But George Parker found out that his best student down there would turn out to be Lester Potts. George initially gave Les and the others pictures to look at and sort of copy and paint, gave them some guidance, and then he sort of let them go on their own. And what happened was that Lester began to express the content of his heart through the art. And things came out that were very deeply buried inside Lester. Pictures from his childhood, saws, his father's hat, lace-up shoes, the old home place, fences, etc. He even painted wood rings over and over and over again, things that he had looked at as a child. And I believe that creative opportunity, the opportunity for Lester to express himself, created healing. You see, Dad was going down a steep course, and he stabilized for about 1.5 to 2 years after the art, he began to create the art. And this delayed us having to place him in a facility, I think, for 2 years. So Lester was able to stay home that much longer. And not only that, he came home smiling. He came home proud. This is a man who could not hammer a nail anymore. Somebody took the hammer away, put a paintbrush in, and put him a canvas down, and he was able to express himself. And the beauty that he expressed is unimaginable. He painted for about 4.5 years, and he painted some incredible scenes. Lester got better. His behavior was better. His outlook was better. He quit crying. He smiled again, and it provided respite for my mother. The person, you see, was still there. The person of Lester Potts was still there. The emotional self of Lester Potts was still there. Could he speak in a full sentence? No. Could he remember what he had eaten that morning for breakfast? No. But was the core of his identity still intact? It absolutely was. And it expressed itself through art. Because the roadblock of his language, Alzheimer's had laid a roadblock, a curtain over his face. It had stopped the language from coming out. But it couldn't stop the content of his character from coming out, and that's what came out through the art. We have 4.5 years, over 100 watercolors that Lester created. Some of the last ones are some of the most incredible because they were truly expressions of his soul and the content of his character. Lester died September the 15th, 2007 in a hospice facility with Mom on one side, me on another. Essentially lying on top of this man, anointing him with our hearts and souls, telling him what a wonderful soul he had been, singing to him, praying with him. And Lester departed about 4:15 the morning of September 15th, 2007, right after he had looked at one of his favorite pictures that he had created that we called Beyond the Sunset. And we donated that picture to the hospice facility after he died. We were so amazed by what happened with him that I couldn't explain as being a neurologist, that I actually became a poet in some ways to help me deal with it, I think. Looking at Dad's art inspired me so much that I tapped into myself. And over about a 30-day period, I wrote about 32 poems, and we put those together in a book with Dad's art called The Broken Jar. Gave that back to Caring Days so that they could raise more money for their programs. The Broken Jar now has taken a life of its own because the American Academy of Neurology found out about this book and story and asked me to be a national media spokesperson for Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's caregivers. And so I've been able to go to Washington many times, and I've been able to go all across the country telling Dad's story and advocate for others like Dad. We had an amazing experience in November of 2010 when we were able to display Dad's art at the David Streets Galleries in Beverly Hills to a crowd of celebrities and media and philanthropists. And those people couldn't believe it. And it was true and it was real. And I bet Lester was laughing about that. Pickens County boy in Beverly Hills. That has opened up doors for us that are incredible, and we're so thankful. We've started a foundation called Cognitive Dynamics based on Dad's story, and the purpose of that foundation is to improve quality of life for the cognitively impaired through the arts. We have a dementia education company, Dementia Dynamics, which seeks to train person-centered care techniques for those that are caring for folks with dementia. We've written a couple of other books. What we've learned is this: the person is stronger than the disease. When dementia's hold is tightened on the person, the soul is loosened and is enabled, actually, to some extent, to be more expressive. You see, the emotional self is not affected by dementia. And so we have to learn how to tap into that emotional self and free up expression so that these individuals can be validated and feel alive again and feel like they're productive members of society again. And the arts help us to do that. The language of the arts. The person still remains and still persists. And if we train our hearts and ears and eyes and hands to receive the messages from that inner core, then the world's a better place. Because I liken the stories that are being lost to Alzheimer's disease to a burning house. We've got to go in and save the treasures. And we're not going to let Alzheimer's steal the life story of these individuals like Lester Potts and so many others. Because if we can't share our life story, then what do we have to say? Lester Potts taught me a lot. But what he mainly taught me is we have to look inside and we have to enrich the inner self. And we can certainly do that through the arts.